Hello, everyone. Happy holidays, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I'm your host, Ray Harkins. Thank you for joining us. We've been having some pretty downloaded episodes the past couple shows, and if you are a new listener, thank you very much for joining us. If you are an old listener, thank you very much for staying. The guest this week is Chad Peterson, the bassist of the, I would define as legendary hardcore band Strife. More on him in a moment. Let's get some business out of the way. PropertyofZach.com, they are our good friends. They post the show when it gets published, and we just love them. So visit PropertyofZach.com and become educated on everything that is happening within the independent music world. Review the show. So hop on iTunes, type some sentences about the show, give us some stars, whatever you feel like doing. Appreciate that. It's slowed down recently, and I understand everybody's busy, but if you haven't done it and you listen to this show regularly, please, I beg of you, because it makes the show look cooler. There's a bunch of positive things that come from it, so I really do appreciate it. If you are not visiting the website, go there now, 100wordspodcast.com. All of my previous guests, not every single one of them, but a lot of them are sending me their sort of top 2013 lists, whether that's specifically in regards to music or whether that's just like, hey, here's some great stuff that I did and you should probably pay attention to. Visit the site, and I'll be posting it pretty much all the month of December. So look back on the year. That is what I feel like December is all about. Everybody's very busy, planning for the holidays, traveling, doing all this other crazy stuff. But I usually like to try to slow down and look back at the year, see what I learned, see what I liked, that sort of stuff. So anyways, let's talk about Chad Peterson. So this is the first time that I ever recorded an interview very late at night. He was able to get me into a show and we met up afterwards. So honestly, I think the interview, we started at 11 at night. If it sounds different, it is. I think Chad was tired, I was tired, and we kind of just, I don't know, we were pretty, for lack of a better term, punchy. When you get silly, you're up late or you have been up late all week and you're like, oh, here, sure, I'll do an interview at 11 at night. That sounds reasonable. For those of you that are used to kind of the structure of all the previous conversations I've had, there is no structure whatsoever here. We definitely bounce around all over the place, but I think it's a really, really cool conversation. And because of the late night punchiness, I think we, dove into a lot of things that, I might not have thought of, when I was very, well rested in the middle of the afternoon or something like that. So I think you will enjoy. Thank you for Chad for doing it. After a long day at work, he didn't need to sit down with me at 11 at night, but he did, and that's awesome. Without further ado, here is Chad, and I will talk to you afterwards. I appreciate that. Well, I'm gonna divert this. I'm gonna take you back in time, Chad. So I'm gonna take you back to probably 95, 96. So that was me when I personally started to be exposed to hardcore and punk and all that stuff. So the One Truth video, the tour video you guys put together, that probably that opened up my eyes to so this is what tour is. So this is what, because, before that, as a kid, you don't really have a concept of a band touring, in the sense of, they just show up and they play, and that's it. You don't think, oh, they drove 8 hours to get here, or right. They drove, And so, watching that video was just, well, first of all, I was I want to go on tour immediately after watching that. And then, like I said, it kind of solidified the concept of, what touring actually is, and, it is this unglamorous, yet hilariously funny thing that you encounter. The fact that you guys put that together must have been hellish, in editing it, and was it one of those things that the idea came to you guys kind of presented, or you guys were we want to put together this video?
Well, we did the video, basically. We had a friend at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I quote friend
Right.
Named Darren Doan.
Okay, yeah.
Who was responsible for doing a lot of videos back in our day. He did a ton of videos for like 10 Foot Pole, Pennywise, Dance Hall Crashers. We did the Blink-182 video, and he was like, hey, you know, I think, you know, if you guys are going to go on tour, I should come along and bring a couple guys and we'll document it.
Okay, yeah.
And all the other stuff in terms of like, you know, the regular van life, the shows, things like that, that was all pretty much the natural part of it. The editing and the follow-up and getting the video over to the label for production and distribution was basically handled by his company. Right. I think for the most part it was like Andrew and Sid at the time might have spent a lot of hours just sitting there kind of like watching like a lot of real like raw footage and kind of like keeping up to date with what Darren was putting together as his final concept for the video. But the editing and the end result of it is just, you know, it just one day it was filmed and it just seemed like it came out.
Was it weird watching that whole thing like as a package, like after it was obviously done, and just like, oh wow, like that was weird. I was portrayed this way. I didn't feel like, because it did focus on each band member, which I thought there were so many unique things about it, just because that hadn't really been done within the quote unquote scene, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, there's what's funny about that video is it actually, we were just talking about this the other day. We were on the East Coast playing a few shows, and we were talking about certain things that were in the video and laughing about them, and then talking about things that didn't make it to the video and wondering whatever happened to that stuff.
Right.
We would want to see this. Like, you know, can we get this out there now? But like there was this whole like cab sequence in Chicago where we got chased down by a cab driver who like pulled out and started waving a gun and stuff. And
I remember that was like, I think it was at the very end of the video. There was just like snippets of it. You guys were all like hiding in the van or something.
And there's a lot more. There's a part where we rush out of the van and like rush up to this giant cab driver, and the whole like car chase that took place through the streets of Chicago that disappeared.
Just magically went away.
We also filmed this video for the song To the Surface, like in some woods that we just pulled off the freeway and started like walking through the woods, like, where's that? You know, that's all on the same trip and it's just gone. But you know, there's things in there as a adult you look back to and you just see yourself as like this, I wouldn't, maybe not innocent, but kid who's just like, what the fuck was I thinking? You know, getting in this van and driving all the way across the country and ending up in like Syracuse and But those shows were awesome, man. I would love to just do that 100% all over again. Right. As you get older, it's like, you know, touring when you're a kid is never the same as touring when you're an adult.
No, not at all.
It's still fun and you still look forward to every show you do, and it's like, I think it's evident, especially like in our live show, that we're still really excited about what we do, and especially about getting out and playing the songs off the new record, and, you know, still trying to grow a scene that we can go to any show and flash back to, you know, maybe the first time you ever saw a hardcore show where there would be anywhere from 700 to 1,000 kids there, and now it's like 250, 300 kids on any given night is like considered a good show. And it's just something that, it's a message that we've been trying to get across in the hardcore scene forever. Where you don't just have to sit at home and watch a show streamed online or watch footage from a show. You can actually leave your house
and attend something,
and go out to a show and see a band play. And it's funny because we'll say it time and again in interviews, it's whenever we used to go to shows, we had to go to shows to find out about the next show.
Of course.
Because there was these things called flyers that you would pick up at shows, and they would tell you where to go the next weekend. And you would look at it and say like, holy shit, Chorus of Disapproval and Outspoken, that's fucking awesome. I saw Outspoken 2 weeks ago and they play all the time, but I'm fucking there.
Yeah, I'm there.
Because there is nothing else to do. I love going to shows. Rather than, I saw Outspoken 2 months ago, or, you know, I saw Chorus of Disapproval do a reunion at the Showcase Theater. I don't need to see it again. Yes, you fucking do. You need to get out and you need to go see these shows. But now kids will, you know, they'll sit at home and they'll talk on message boards about, you know, going to this show and going to that show. But it's just not the same. There's just not as big of a turnout anymore. And
it's true.
To be perfectly honest with you, it's not that the turnout affects how Strife approaches a show. Because if we play a show and 30 kids show up, we're going to play a show just as hard as if there's 300 kids there.
Sure.
It's more or less just kind of watching a scene that we've been a part of since we were 15 years old deteriorate.
Right, a road, right.
Which isn't really deteriorating because in all sense and purpose, the scene right now is bigger than it's ever been.
Of course. The accessibility is there in ways that it never has been.
Yeah, it's more kids know about hardcore. More kids are buying records. More kids are watching videos. More kids are buying merchandise. But more kids are definitely not going to shows.
Right. They're interacting with it as it's a passive interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like saying like, oh yeah, I picked up the new Terror album. It fucking rules. I love it. But you know, oh, they're playing in Connecticut this weekend. Are you gonna go? No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I love that record.
Yeah.
You do not know Terror until you've seen Terror live.
Right.
I've seen them many times before, and we just played with them this last weekend in Syracuse, and we did it at this community center where all of us played on the floor. There was probably like 300 kids there.
Yeah.
And even with kids diving over every single band member's head, they are the absolute tightest band I've ever heard live.
Yeah, they're a machine.
And it's, you know, you can watch them in a club up on a stage. You can watch them opening for big bands. You could watch them like headlining their own shows or whatever, which are generally great shows that draw a big crowd. But the shows where like we get to experience playing on the floor, being part of the crowd, not having to be on a stage, not having to worry about a barricade.
Right.
And then just watching them do something like that night after night with how fucking tight they stay and not miss a single beat is mind-blowing.
Right. That's something you need. That's something you need to, like you said, witness and experience.
Yeah, and you can sit home and listen to a record that's pieced together. It's not recorded live, and you know, unless you're the Bronx and it's the first album they put out.
Right.
Yeah, we're in a room and we jam this shit out. But
exactly.
For the most part, people are just sitting in a studio going through things part by part by part, and it's not the same as going out there and watching them replicate the songs that you love hearing.
Right.
So, I mean, that's the part that we wanted to really bring across in the documentary was we wanted people to experience what being on the road was actually like. Being out at these shows was like, you know, it's like we'll get up there and we'll play through and the camera will be behind the drums and all you hear in the opening sequence of that song is just the fucking drums. You can't hear a single guitar.
No, not anything.
Bass, but the camera's shot out right through the drum set and you just see 500 kids going absolutely apeshit.
Yeah.
And that's something that we just want to convey, you know, and make people understand that it really is part of you being part of a scene.
Of course, yeah. It opened my vision for what you could do, obviously, like as a touring band, as a musician, as, you know, a fan of the music. Like it just opened all these avenues up where I was just like, I'm almost positive that I wore one version of it out that I had to buy another copy on VHS because it's like I just kept watching it because it was just like, oh my gosh, like this is everything.
It was funny. We played with this band in Holyoke, Massachusetts this last weekend. I shit you not.
Yeah.
As the guy is up on stage, before they start the next song, he walks over by the PA and he grabs a copy of The One Truth VHS. He walks back out in front of the crowd and he says, "This is the video you guys need to watch." He said, "This opened my eyes to touring. This is the best tour documentary I've ever seen. And if anyone here needs to borrow it, please come up and see me after the show." Right. And, you know,
that's incredible. It's cool that obviously that's still a touchstone for so many people and there's still so many fond memories attached to it, especially because, like you said, obviously as it's aged and you can look back on it and be like, oh, like that's pretty fucking cheesy or that looks bad or whatever, but it's like, no, there's obviously something inherently honest about it, and that's exactly what it was.
What was funny was, you know, we were stoked, first of all, that this dude brought something out that we haven't seen in years.
Yeah.
Like, Andrew probably has a copy of it. I think I have a copy somewhere, but the rest of us are just kind of like, okay, first of all, you need this thing called a VHS player.
Right. Try to find one of those first. Yeah.
Maybe looks like a toaster.
Right.
And it was just this.
Yeah, that's hilarious. But you yourself, born and raised in like the Valley, and
no, I was actually born in Las Vegas, and
me too. You were one of the that's weird.
Really?
People aren't born in Vegas.
Yeah,
I mean, do people, like, when you say that, do people are like, oh, you're born in Vegas? Like,
they think it's kind of weird because I don't know why, but for some reason people think that I came out here from the East Coast or something. Because they're like, oh, I hear a little bit of like a accent in your voice. I'm like, that's just how I talk, man. I mean, it's right. I don't know. It's just weird.
That's weird. So Vegas, yeah, because that's all I get is just like, who's born in Vegas? People, you go there to retire or you go there to gamble. Like, no one's born there.
Well, people that were born in Vegas leave Vegas.
Of course.
And it doesn't take very long.
No, not a lot at all.
My family moved to Southern California when I was about 5 years old.
Okay.
And we started out in Ventura County. We ended up in Oxnard, Portland, Ventura. Okay. And then we kind of gravitated a little bit south to the Canal Valley, Thousand Oaks area.
Sure. What were your parents doing when they were out there in Vegas?
I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah.
My mom was just a regular housewife.
Sure.
And
do you have brothers and sisters as well? Or?
I have a sister who's 2.5 years older than I am.
Okay.
Who has... I do need to also footnote that my whole family, with the exception of me, has since returned to Vegas.
Really?
Yeah. Well,
so everybody's back in Vegas.
I don't know about my biological father. I don't know where he is.
Okay.
But my mom has moved back there. My sister lives back there. My niece and my nephew were both born there. So, and they're both
the Vegas pole,
like 16 and 14. So they're actually going for it, man. They're putting the work in. But
yeah.
I think they're dying to leave.
Sure.
So yeah, we kind of just settled down in the Canal Valley. My dad was a car salesman turned subsequent real estate person, and then eventually
why did they
disappeared.
Why did you guys move out here then?
I think it had something to do with opportunity.
Sure.
And mining for gold, and he heard some stuff was going on in California.
Sure. Yeah.
I can't really say.
Well, yeah, I mean, you were 5. You're not gonna remember, but
my dad was someone who really wasn't the best family provider.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was something where even as kids, it was like, I just know, like, from what I hear about, from what my mom used to tell me, but it was something where it was, the house that I was born into was co-signed by my grandmother, and then my father sold it and kept the money and relocated to California and tried to start everything fresh and new out here, when really in the back of my mind as I got older, I could kind of look back on a lot of things and see that he was running from something and getting away from a town that was heavily mob influenced at the time.
Totally.
And by the way, I don't tell many people this, so I'm going to tell you this right now.
It's okay. Well, no, I could see the idea, especially if he's quote unquote burning family members. Now he's like, all right, well, let's go to California.
We moved around a lot as kids,
right? And
then
when did he become absent in your life?
It was around the time that I was in 3rd grade, so I guess that would have been 12 or so, is when my parents decided that they were going to divorce.
Okay.
The guy should stay together and the girl should stay together, or where are the kids going to go discussion that was being had between them and, them to me and to my sister. And,
right.
Him trying to be like a great guy, like taking us out for a
let's
day
go
down at Santa Monica Pier and shit.
Let's go miniature golfing. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So, around that same time, we had to leave the one house that we were in because we couldn't pay the rent. We had to go move to another house that we were in, which was in Thousand Oaks, over by this junior high called Lindero. It was, we kind of stayed there for a little while as I got to be into about 6th grade.
Okay.
My grandmother passed away.
Okay.
Who was my mom's mom.
Sure.
Not my dad's mom. She was absent most of my life as well.
Okay.
But my grandmother passed away and left my mother somewhat of a small inheritance that
gave her the ability to kind of like...
Well, actually, no. It made my dad surprisingly fall in love with my mom again.
Oh, I see. I see the wrinkle there. Yeah,
they were going to stay together for the good of the family.
Okay.
So,
but you had a feeling he had his eyes on a different prize, so to speak.
Oh, I know. He was a definite angler.
Right.
So basically, long and the short of it is, he took about a year off from selling cars and got his real estate license, which of course required money.
Of course.
Which of course came from the inheritance.
Right.
And he got his real estate license and didn't sell a single house.
Yeah.
Eventually, the money itself ran out.
Sure.
And I remember coming home from school one day and coming in the house, and my mom was just like bawling, and she still had her pajamas on. And
right.
I was just kind of like,
you're like, this isn't good. Whatever
happening?
This is, yeah.
You know, and she begins to tell me like what happened, and I was just kind of like, oh wow, you know, it's kind of heavy.
Mm-hmm.
So after about a couple days of living in a very uncomfortable house, I was at school one day, and I left school, and my dad was picking me up, and he was like, you know, hey, let's go. So I get in the car and we start driving, and the next thing I know, I'm down by La Tuna Canyon.
Okay.
On the freeway.
Right.
And he was like,
we're not going home.
What would you say if we just left?
Holy shit.
And I was like, I kind of feel like we already did.
Right. Aren't we on our way now? Yeah.
I was, just a kid.
That's terrifying, though. I mean, did you have an okay relationship with your father? Or was it one of those things where you're like, yo, I don't want to fucking live with this guy?
Well, it was an okay relationship to the point where I felt like he was my father and I should trust him.
Sure.
I was too young to really understand what was happening in my family.
Right.
And pretty much raised in a way to think that this could be kind of okay.
Right.
So...
yeah, you're like, I am, after all, a kid. Even though I am 12, I am a kid.
So we start driving, and the next thing I know, we end up in Yuma, Arizona, and we start kind of like cruising through a bunch of different hotels, and we ended up in just kind of like the lower south of the U.S., and he was like, have you figured out at all where we were going yet? And I was like, well, I guess we're going to Florida. And as a kid, just like driving across the country, seeing, what's in front of you.
Right.
And he was like, why would you say that? And I was like, well, because it's probably the same closest climate environment to California.
Right.
And he was like, yep, that's right. That's where we're going.
Oh, my God.
So we ended up in Orlando, Florida.
Okay.
After maybe 5 days of driving through the South.
But you weren't, like, would you classify that as kidnapping? Like, you were, like, was your mom aware that you were going to be driven across the country? Oh my God.
She was not, no.
Yeah, that must have been a fun conversation. Not for you, but obviously with, hey, we're in Florida.
there's some haziness to it.
I can imagine.
Thinking back on it, it all seemed a little sketchy.
Oh yeah.
So.
Well, and above all, traumatic. I can't think why. I mean, I'm sure part of it was like, oh, this is cool, like I can take a road trip, but then you're like, wow, this is kind of really strange. Yeah. I don't think anybody else experiences this.
Well, what was funny was we kind of ended up in this place, this apartment complex, this apartment community down there where we were on the lam.
Right, yeah.
I wasn't in school.
No.
My dad gave me a skateboard, and I got to spend my days skateboarding and watching MTV.
Right,
That's
which
basically all I got to do as like a 12, 13-year-old kid.
Right. Which on one hand is heaven, but you're just like, when's this other shoe going to drop?
Well, it took about a month.
Oh my God.
For that shoe to drop. He got a job at a car dealership down there, and apparently when he went to go cash one of his checks, that sent a notification back to Los Angeles because, of course, my mom had opened up an investigation. She hired a private eye and all this shit.
Right.
About 24 hours or so later, I'm at home, 11:30 at night. My dad's not home from work yet.
Right.
And I'm just sitting there watching TV, and I hear like a knock at the door.
Yeah.
And I get up and I look through the people, and I don't know if you're old enough to remember the TV show Jake and the Fat Man.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
So that dude was at my door. Not him, but a dude that exactly like
resembled
the Fat Man.
Right.
He had the glasses on his head. He had a cigar, and he was like, is your father home? And I said, no, he is at work.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, okay, well, we'll come back when he's home. And I was like, okay. So I shut the door, they go back down, he's sitting in his car. Of course, I call my dad, and I was like, hey, there's a guy here looking for you.
Yeah.
He asked if you were here. I told him you weren't. And he was like, okay, I'll come home. And he came home, and they had a little conversation down in the parking lot. And then he walks up to the apartment, and he says, well, you have to go home or I have to go to jail.
Oh, shit.
And he was like, I don't want to go to jail, so I need you on a plane tomorrow.
Wow.
And I had to pack my things and get on a plane back to California.
Right.
Where I was pretty much exposed to every single bad thing that had happened to my mom in the month that I'd been gone.
Right.
She was left borderline homeless. She had to go back to work. She got to work. She went to work in a church office.
Yeah.
And she just basically like was doing everything that she could to try to at least be a provider.
Right.
And she was so happy to see me, but I was so confused by the fact that first I was gone and now I'm back, and I was like, you took me away from my dad. And
right. Well, you mean you're in the middle of this like impossible situation where it's just like you don't have the whole picture because no one's telling you, and you're just like being told at the minute to do this thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very turmoiled relationship for a long time, and I mean, being an adult now, I kind of like look at how it's actually developed me as an adult.
Right.
With all that stuff when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. And I think in a way it kind of like it closed me off a bit.
Of course,
I
could understand
a lot of emotional feeling in a way.
Well, yeah.
Like I try to be a very open and responsive person and a very understanding person, but a lot of the time I just kind of like revert to when I was younger and I had to close off a lot of feelings because of what was going on in my life.
Right.
And I mean, obviously that's not like the type of person I want to be. I don't think that's how it is, but so anyway, it's after bouncing around from a couple houses, we ended up in this one place back down right next to actually where we used to live, back on Flores, which is where I pretty much met most of the friends that I still have to this day, and everyone in the band that I play with now.
Right.
Have for the last like 20 years. So,
and all this stuff happened when you were like 12, 13. So it's like that's like right in the junior high, like you're about to enter high school period, right? I think
it was at the end of when I was in 6th grade.
Sixth grade,
So it was right as I was getting into junior high school.
Right. And is that when had music kind of entered your life already through skateboarding, or was it did it kind of start to come about after that?
Not yet. There were still a couple years, like my junior high school years, where I spent doing like a lot of maybe like not so good things, a lot more wrong things than I should have.
I'm sure you were also experiencing the fact that you were just trying to make sense of all of this stuff that you had just gone through as well.
Well, it's funny because I pretty much skated through junior high school, and I don't mean like on a skateboard. I mean I
just coasting. Yeah. Give me some C's, I'm good.
Yeah, and it was fine, like going into the high school public school system, but. I would say like 9th grade is where I started to kind of discover a lot more punk rock and definitely a lot more hardcore. It was like, out of that entire group, it was like, one of my friends, Tony Moore, is like a lifelong friend of mine ever since I was maybe about 6th or 7th grade or so.
Okay.
And we had more friends that kind of like came along and fell by the wayside, but as I got into high school, well, I met Andrew in junior high, but we hadn't been really good friends yet. And then we started to become better friends as we got into high school because he knew more about punk rock and hardcore at that time than really any of us did. He was already going to shows, and he was hanging out a lot with our drummer at the time, Sid, and they were... listening to a lot more punk rock back in those days. I was listening to like a lot of Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd.
Sure.
And
as most 8th and 9th graders do.
Yeah, it's pretty standard.
Right, as one does.
And, we, it was like as we started hanging out more and started, spending a lot more time skateboarding and stuff after school and going out on school nights and not school nights and tormenting security guards through our youth with this little neighborhood game that we used to have called Alpha Blue. I should tell you that.
Alpha Blue sounds incredible.
Alpha Blue was amazing. My mom, as she was trying to provide for us, ended up working 2 jobs, and one would be a day job, one would be a night job, and she was working a night job bagging groceries at a grocery store.
Right.
Which pretty much took her into 2 a.m, which meant that I was out almost every night until 2 a.m.
Right, until you had to be home. Right, exactly.
Yeah, and the complexes that we lived in at the time had this security guard company called Alpha Blue.
Yeah.
So as we would pretty much kind of like developed these missions on how we could just
Just
torment these security guards on a nightly basis.
Right, who were clearly, like, they did not want to be in this position of being a security guard over this complex.
Yeah. And the only thing that we wanted to do was really just get chased.
Right.
So...
that was the mission.
We
just
would,
get chased.
Light a tennis ball on fire and throw it at their car. We would go up into the grocery stores behind the condo complex and dig through the garbage, pull fruit out, and just
huck it at
kind
them.
of like throw it at them until they just started chasing us. And the whole point was to ditch them.
Right.
Until one time we, found out that we weren't really running from security guards. We were running from cops, and they were a lot harder to ditch.
Yeah.
than regular security guards.
And they have a lot more authority than your average security guard.
Yeah, I mean, when a cop knocks on your door at 1 a.m. and wants to know where your mom is, and you tell her she's at work, you're kind of like, fucked.
Oh, shit, yeah.
We used to take stuffed animals and dress them up as people.
Okay.
Because some of us, we had paper routes, and we used to take rubber bands and start linking things together like shirts and clothes as we would dress up teddy bears. And
right.
We would just kind of like lay them down on the sidewalk as cars would drive by.
Oh, sure. And they think they're running over a person, right.
Well, not running over. I mean, they would just be like on the side of the road, but they would drive by and screech and like come to stop as we're like hiding in the bushes, snickering as kids.
Of course. Yeah. You gotta do stuff like that.
So they would just get out of the car, run over to this would-be body laying on the side of the street.
Oh, that's a teddy bear. That's a giant teddy bear. Yeah. They put a t-shirt on.
I feel like I should start this whole thing over.
Right. No, this is incredible. It's pointers for kids of the future.
And perfect. Some guys would just pick it up and start yelling at us and yell like how they know we're watching them. Just toss the thing in the trunk, and we would just bummed out because we'd have to start over.
Of course. You're like, damn it. It's gonna take forever. Yeah,
I know. It was a lot of fun.
That's
perfect.
Being a
kid for sure.
Was it one of those things where it was pretty immediate? Like once you started to like go to shows, that this was like something that you really identified with? Like you were like, yes, this is it. Or were you just kind of like, oh, I'm along for the ride?
Oh, back on track. Okay.
I mean, we can talk about Alpha Blue for another 40 minutes, obviously.
I could talk about Alpha Blue for the rest of the night, man. That is one of the best memories of being a kid for me.
That's good.
Running through my neighborhood streets at night with my friends was amazing.
That's awesome.
Yes, my first actual hardcore show was seeing Gorilla Biscuits Instead and Reason to Believe at the Country Club.
Okay, yeah.
And it was either December 7th or 14th.
Okay.
A very long time ago.
Sure, yeah.
And actually, I have it here somewhere. And I went to that show with, our regular crew of friends that we hung out with.
Were you like in 9th grade, 10th grade at this time?
I was in 10th grade.
Okay, yeah.
And I'd gone to that show. It was me, Andrew, Tony Moore, Sid, our friend Rob Bollinger, and it was definitely a pretty big show, like, for our area.
When you showed at the Country Club, that was the one that was like Reseda, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Mike Machin, he became, the bass player for the band Eyelid.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, to me, like, when I walked in there, that was 100% one of the best things I'd ever seen in my life. I was completely... I mean, my first concert ever as a kid was seeing Depeche Mode at Dodger Stadium.
Right.
And this was not Depeche Mode at Dodger Stadium.
Pretty intimate venue, right?
I just walk in there, and the way the country club was set up, it was kind of like it had, a little bit of a tiered floor, and then it had some tables set up behind the floor, and then it had an open dance floor. And I just remember, like, being, 15 years old, just diving off tables into a pit of people all night long.
Right.
And I guess, that was kind of like my first stage dive. I remember John Bunch was singing for Reason to Believe.
Right.
And I climbed up onto the stage. I did this because it was a pretty good distance at the country club, like to actually like clear some space.
Right.
So I get up on the stage. I run around him. I come back. I tapped him on the shoulder.
Right.
And just dove. And that was probably like my first legitimate stage dive as a kid.
And you landed somewhat safely?
I think so.
That's good.
It was fine because we were just doing fucking dives off tables in the back of the place all night long.
Right.
But it was my greatest, memory at a hardcore show as a kid because that's where I figured, you know, like I showed up at the show, like I was wearing a Minor Threat shirt, I was wearing some sort of like pegged printed pants and maybe high top Vans. I don't even know if I was that cool at the time.
Right.
And I absolutely 100% knew that I did not fit into this walking into this place, but
You felt at home.
I had heard Gorilla Biscuits before.
Right.
I wasn't familiar. I might have heard Instead at the time. I for sure maybe didn't hear Reason to Believe.
Yeah.
But I will say I was impressed. I was blown away by Reason to Believe.
Yeah.
More people should listen to that band.
Yes.
But yeah, it was.
So that basically started you on your path, and then was Strife your actual first band that you ever played in?
Yes.
You're pretty lucky.
Well,
I mean, you are in this because most people play in awful bands beforehand. Which I mean, it's good that you got that experience of playing in a good. Well, I mean, it's arguable that Strife was good immediately, but
well, let me actually.
Do you have like your hardcore archives on your laptop? Is that what you're referencing here?
No, it's just dealing with show stuff. So
that's fine.
Going to that show, I was not in a band yet. I was not.
Right.
I had listened to some hardcore. I was listening to bands like Subhumans, No Means No, Dead Kennedys, things like that at the time, and that was my first exposure into a hardcore show.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
At the time, I was not straight edge, and that opened my eyes to what the hardcore community and being straight edge was actually about. It was walking in a blue place as probably the most wannabe looking punk kid you've ever seen in your life, from Thousand Oaks to feeling like they should be there. And it wasn't a feeling of being like cast out or glared at by people. It was a feeling of 100% acceptance. And I mean, granted, I was there with my friends, but it would be the feeling that I would want if I just happened to move to a place and caught wind of a show going on and walked into a club and saw that I can go here and be accepted. I can listen.
There were other people like you, and it was
Yeah, I mean, it's just something where I absolutely felt accepted in the scene and embraced, and that was really what opened my eyes to what hardcore was about and what hardcore should be, was just 100% a feeling of unity. I mean, back in those days, it was something where you can put any band on a bill from like, you know, Shelter to Split Lip to Chromax.
Yeah, it didn't matter. It didn't matter.
Any one of those bands, arguably today, like I couldn't look back if it was 2013 and ever call Split Lip a hardcore band.
Yeah, no.
But they were accepted by the hardcore
or
community.
Endpoint or anything. Yeah, exactly.
And it, you know, those were the things where you could just go to shows, you could learn about new bands, you could feel accepted, you could meet friends, not only from your city, you can make ties in other cities and other states, and you would do this thing called writing letters. And you would send,
having pen pals, Here's a demo of this awesome local band,
It was how I found so much new music, was just like, can I tell you in like the mid to late 90s how many different copies of the Burn demo I had to get? I would just be like, fuck, I wore this out, you know. Justin Mulder, can you please send me a new copy of this? Or I would have to like write a letter to Chris Daly and be like, hey, I heard you have the Burn demo, can you please send this to me?
I need a dub of this.
And he would definitely send it over to me with a bunch of like Eye for an Eye and Another Wall and other, you know, Boston bands from that area and stuff. And just be like, oh, you should really check this stuff out. And that's pretty much how kids back in those days got exposed to music.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And
well, it was its own form of social networking before there was devices to put those pieces together for you. Besides, I mean, there was a device. It was the mail and tapes.
I mean, I would say I was a lot more fortunate growing up in the accessibility of going to shows because, you know, we were kids, we didn't drive, but every weekend we would find ourselves in Riverside or San Diego or Long Beach. And my second show that I ever went to that was a hardcore show was Chain of Strength at Spanky's. And again, it was like stage dive mania.
Right.
You know, it was fucking absolute dog piles, sing-alongs, and just the greatest feeling in the world. Sick of It All with Biohazard at Spanky's was the exact same, and then you know, all the down the road.
Right, you became immersed in it, and it's one of those things where it's like, you know, once. It's funny because it's like you obviously hear certain people. It's like, you know, they go to a few shows and then they're like, okay, that's cool, that's it. But then there's people like obviously, you know, us, where it's like we get exposed to it and it's just like that's all I can think about.
Yeah,
like that's all I really want to do.
Yeah, at the time, that's absolutely what it was. And then so.
And why did you choose bass? Because there was no one playing bass in your group of friends.
I didn't get into
it's okay
how I got into Strife yet. So
it's okay.
We were going to shows back in those days, and what we noticed that was lacking in our area was a hardcore scene.
Right.
We had to drive to go see bands and whatnot, so we really wanted to bring hardcore to Thousand Oaks in the Canal Valley.
Right.
Andrew and Sid had been like just kind of like jamming out and practicing in Sid's bedroom, just kind of like putting songs together and stuff, and they had known a guy from Newbury Park who was into hardcore. He was straight edge, and he sang in a band called Monster Club at the time.
Okay.
And his, you know, that's Rick.
Right.
So they hit him up and said, hey, you know, we're putting together a straight edge band, and we want to know if you wanted to sing for it. And he was like, yeah, totally, you know, I'll come down, I'll check it out. And I can't remember if it was him who brought in the original bass player or someone Andrew knew, but he was from Moore Park. So Rick was from Moore Park. I think it was actually somebody that Rick knew.
Okay.
And his name was Scotty Collin. And he was a straight edge kid from out there. And he was playing bass. And they put together a band called Stand As One.
Right.
They played a show at Moore Park High School with Outspoken.
Okay.
That was the first, I believe, Stand As One show, and it was awesome. I was in the front row. I had the fucking demo that I recorded on a 4-track.
Sure.
Question mark, Begin to Care, all from the past, and it was you know, just like, you know, a bunch of friends hanging out, being like, wow, I got to drive like 20 minutes to go to a fucking bona fide hardcore show. This is amazing, and Outspoken's playing, and my friends are up there playing right now. This is incredible. It was a lot of fun. So after that show, Scotty got into drugs. He started smoking weed, and so obviously he had to leave the straight edge band.
Right.
And I was sitting at home one day, and Sid calls me, and he was like, "Hey, can you get your hands on a bass?" And I was like, "I guess," because our friend Mike Schenkel had this Sound Gear or Ibanez or something like that. I was like, "Yeah, I can do that." He was like, "Cool, we're going to be practicing down in our friend Tony's garage." And I was like, "Oh, really? Okay. I guess
I guess
there
of
was
it.
something
Right.
that kind of maybe I don't know why they thought I played bass. I mean, I had a guitar.
You're like, I gave no indication besides me having this stringed instrument in my house.
Well, I had a guitar,
right,
and I would play along to like Downcast records and things like that in my house.
All right, so they were like, all right, call Chad up. He probably can play 4 strings.
I couldn't tell you what a power chord was at that time. I couldn't tell you, like,
yeah.
I would just put my hand to a note and know that maybe it sounded similar to what I was hearing.
Right.
So, sure enough, get a hold of my Mike's bass, and I go down there and I plug in, and Andrew starts to show me like the opening to All From the Past.
Okay.
And I think it becomes immediately apparent that I do not know what is happening or what to do.
You're like deer in headlights.
Andrew literally puts his hand on a fret and a note and a string and just hits it.
Here you go.
And I just copied it the entire way.
Incredible.
And that's pretty much how I've been playing bass for the last
You just made it. How do you play that part again? Okay, cool. Awesome.
No, it's exactly what it is. I mean,
right.
You know, when it comes to hardcore, it's not rocket science, but I mean, I played the bass in Strife.
Right.
but I am not a bass player.
Right. You never would feel comfortable labeling yourself as a musician.
No.
Right. And I think it's funny because most bass players that end up playing hardcore, like you did, like it's totally because they already have guitarists. They're like, oh, who do we like to hang out? Chad's a cool guy to hang out with. Like, let's
not go that far.
Well, maybe at the time you're friends.
I'm an okay guy.
You're an okay guy, but you were okay enough to play bass and put that together.
Yeah. So, my first show with Stand as One was in, I think, our friend Jeff Moore's garage.
Okay.
It was a fun show.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. And then after that, we drove up to Santa Barbara and we played a show at the Barn. Oh. That was the most awful thing you've ever heard.
Sure.
It might have been copying what Andrew was doing, note for note.
Right.
I might not have known what tuning was.
Right.
And we all had some pretty shoddy equipment back then. We were actually all pretty out of tune at that show and sounded pretty god-awful.
Right.
So we changed our name. And
really?
Yeah.
It was that bad that you're like, this shit, I didn't know that.
Well, you know...
I've never heard of a band be like, yo, we were terrible. We gotta change our name. We're changing our identity.
You know, 20 years later, I don't have a problem talking about it. It was an absolutely bad show that caused us to, pretty much move from Stand as One and become Strife.
Okay.
But at the same time, it also kind of refocused us into what we were doing as kids turning into adults.
Right.
Putting out our first 7-inch on New Age Records was obviously a really big deal to us because we loved everything Mike Hartsfield was doing, and he was pretty much the hardcore label.
Oh, totally.
When we sat down to record those songs, and we were like,
who else would we put this out with? Put out with Mike? Yeah. Did you at that time? Because Strife pretty much hit the ground running as far as you guys became known very well within Southern California and obviously arguably the West Coast once you guys started to get out there. At this time, did you give a shit about school? Were you like, yo, I can't wait to graduate and tour and do this? Or were you like, oh, I would love to be a real estate agent? Did you have sights on other things like that?
I mean, school was never really that important to me to begin with. I went to a couple years of college, and I was psyched by the fact that my college had a Taco Bell, and that's what I would look forward to.
Right. So that shows how committed you were to your studies.
I was a journalism/business major that really looked forward to breaks at college, hanging out with my friends.
Right.
And sitting in classes was a fucking nightmare to me.
Right.
It was.
How many years did you do of college?
2.
2-ish?
Maybe 3. I did. I was in Seattle University for a year, and I went to Moore Park College for a year.
Okay, got it.
No, 2 years. I was at Moore Park College for 2 years and Seattle University for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Seattle University was the cause of a minor freak out / hiatus that I took from Strife to move up to the Pacific Northwest for about a year or so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a, but I mean, was Strife touring at the time? They were...
Well, they were, and that was kind of a little bit of the reason at the time that I took off was because it was, coming up on me living at home. We had just confirmed a U.S. tour with Earth Crisis that we were leaving for almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And probably 2 days, or I would say 2 days before that maybe, I had thrown all my stuff in the back of my truck and drove up to Seattle.
Oh, okay.
So they showed up at my house to pick me up to leave for the tour. And my mom said, he isn't here. He's gone.
I would have fucking killed you.
Well, there were definitely angry feelings there. So
I just knowing, always being the business guy in the bands that I've played in and putting all that shit together and then being like, oh, where the fuck are you, Chad? What the shit?
Well, you have to keep in mind that cell phones didn't exist at that time.
Right.
If you wanted to get a hold of somebody, you'd have to get them on a landline. I'm not driving up and my phone rings and they're like, where are you? I'm like, Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
Where are you?
Where are you? Oh, well, that's right. We're going to go on tour. Right.
Yeah, you would literally have to know where I was at. So,
wow.
They didn't have any idea. And it was a shitty fucking thing for me to do, but
you had to do it.
I just wasn't sure at the time that this is what I wanted.
Right. Well, I mean, it's always a scary thing when push comes to shove, where it's just like, okay, am I dedicating my life towards this theoretical band that, like, at that time, there's no precedent. You guys weren't looking at it and being like, oh, dude, like, there are these bands that have existed and have two, I mean, you have Sick of It All. That's like the main band that everyone points to in that era that can be like, oh, you can make a living out of playing hardcore.
Yeah.
Well,
it was something where it was like, we had already been touring. We had just finished like an East Coast tour that we did with a few shows with Undertow. We played some shows with Mouthpiece, and we came back. We had definitely done some stuff by this point, and the
momentum had built, but it was still scary, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Which is obviously what led you to do what you did.
Well, the girl that I was dating at the time decided that she was going to pack up and move to Seattle, and I was kind of like in a really fucked place in my mind.
Right.
I was like, well, you're moving to Seattle, and I'm supposed to leave on tour in like 3 days.
Right.
And so I just kind of closed that gap and left for Seattle in 2.
Sure.
And I made the obvious wrong choice.
But then you were able to get back into the good graces of everybody. They understood where you were coming from and the crisis you were going through.
Yeah,
mentally.
it was. I'd moved up there and I had been hanging out with like the Undertow kids and stuff. And some of us started a band called 9 Iron Spitfire, and I was still playing music, and I cheated my way through playing guitar at that time.
Right.
Which was funny.
Right.
Because
9 Iron Spitfire, to be fair, pretty sloppy.
You're welcome.
Right. That was part of the charm with 9 Iron Spitfire, but
that was kind of a foundation that Damien and I had started at the time. Was we just wanted to be fucking noisy.
Yeah. Oh,
I mean, we
accomplished.
I did a band before that with Corey Sabatini and our friend C-Hag up there called Dead Skin Mask.
Oh yeah.
That
I didn't know you played
a couple things with, and then I moved into 9 Iron Spitfire, and we started up that, and I did a couple shows with that. I got a phone call one day from Tony Brome, and he was like, hey, you need to move back to California. And I was like, okay. I had never thought that I was going to. At that time, I understood how pissed off my friends were at me.
Of course.
It's like they drove straight to the East Coast. I think Todd was filling in on bass, and then they met up with Earth Crisis, and Ben Reed filled in on bass on some shows, and it was
awful.
Quite a thing for a little bit of a tour. He's like, yeah, but when they're done with this tour, you need to be back in California, and you guys are going to call you, and hopefully we can work some shit out. And we were able to talk on the phone, and I just, while I was still out there, I started reconnecting with all my friends, and once again, I threw my shit in the back of my truck and I drove back down to LA because I wanted to be with my friends again.
Right.
I was kind of just done.
Yeah. And you're like, well, if we're cool now, then we're cool.
Well, it wasn't so much, it was just like, I realized that that's where I wanted to be, and I had made the wrong choice.
Sure.
It wasn't a band thing. It wasn't feeling lonely in the Pacific Northwest or anything like that. I just wanted to be with my friends again.
Yeah.
And so I go back down, and I sat in one practice, and then we did a show with Sick of It All, Orange 9mm, and Korn in Orange County. And that's, from that moment on, it was just like, that's where it was.
Right. That's what you did.
I mean, there was the obvious breakup, like a few, years later.
Right.
But I'd never really ever wanted to be a part of anything else more than I'd wanted to be like just playing in a band with my friends until things got a little too crazy and we had to step back a little bit.
Right. Well, the thing that I always was so interesting about what you guys did, because it's like you look at I refer to it as the big three, where you could argue it's like Strife, Snapcase, Earth Crisis, the bands that obviously made a substantial impact in the mid-90s, and it's like each of those bands went off to obviously do their own specific thing, whereas Earth Crisis, like they had moments of some sort of mainstream appeal from playing Ozfest and Roadrunner and all that stuff, but you guys seem to always have this like incremental build, but you didn't stylistically change yourself, whereas like obviously like and Earth Crisis didn't change themselves either. Snapcase was dramatic.
I would say that there's a big change between
That's
Firestorm 7-inch and the All Out War 7-inch to Gomorrah Season Then.
That's true. Definitely way more metallic.
However, it's a working change.
Yeah.
And you are right about that. It's like kind of like between Strife, Snapcase, I would say even Hatebreed.
That's true,
And Earth
I always
Crisis.
put Hatebreed just a smidge later, but yeah, still.
They are later, but
Yeah.
as one of the more notable bands to come out of Victory Records, they
Of course.
have definitely maintained their style and sound for longer than any of us now.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, for
they
sure.
put out far more records, and
But the thing that struck, especially when you guys released In This Defiance, it was one of those things where it's like that to me was like the, that was like the market point where you were like, okay, we can be viewed as a band that plays outside of this proverbial hardcore scene.
well,
I mean, whether or not that was the intention is a different story, but that was the kind of like what I viewed, where it's like, okay, like they could be a metal band, for lack of a better term.
those days you were actually preaching to the choir when you would come out there and talk about how you're a straight edge band.
Right.
And this is what it means to be drug free.
Right.
This is what it means to have unity at your shows.
You're preaching to the converted.
Exactly.
Right.
So
Or converted and or already aware. Like,
and
we're good with that.
Sure, we would get out there and say things like, "We're Strife from Los Angeles, and we are a straight edge band."
Yeah,
Because we'd be like, "Fuck yeah, right."
of course.
And that would be pretty much show after show after show, and you can go out there and put yourself up against any crowd when you're doing a show back in those days. And when you're playing a hardcore show, you will get the reaction you're looking for 9 times out of 10.
Of course.
Or you can drive up to Sacramento and play a show with Incubus
Right.
and say, like, "We're Strife from Los Angeles and we are a straight edge band."
Right. Cricket. Yeah, totally.
And then you can start talking to people about what hardcore is and
Of
what straight
course.
edge means to you and how it can benefit, going to a hardcore show and understanding new forms of music without having to go and see the same thing all the time.
Right.
And absolutely, again, 9 times out of 10, you may not get the reaction you're looking for.
Right.
But you're going to talk to anywhere from 15 to 20 kids after the show that said, "Hey man, I really dug what you guys were about, and I'd love to check out more of this. Where can I find this?"
Right.
And it really was just about not trying to talk to 500 people at a time that already know what you're about, but it was really about trying to reach like the 5 or 10 people at a time.
Of course,
that had
you're
no idea. who
right.
they
You're
were.
scooping up these people that were completely unsuspecting of whatever this scene was, and then appealing to that, and then being able to bridge that gap that other bands either weren't interested in or were not willing to play to those audiences. And like that's what I so distinctly remember, like seeing you guys with like Voodoo Glow Skulls one week. And then like, a month later seeing you with like, your typical hardcore show. And that's what, it always appealed to me that it's like, that's fucking great that you guys can play with all of these types of bands and be able to still feel somewhat at home, even though the audience is like, I mean, I definitely remember playing, Voodoo Glow Skull shows being really rough on you guys, besides the 30 kids or so that were up front.
Dude, we
But-
played so many ska shows. You
Right.
have no idea.
Which
We
is so
played,
hilarious.
San Bernardino with meal ticket. Back, it was like...
That's what you did, yeah, I guess. To play to different people, like you were saying.
What show was last night? Phosphorescent. Phil from FYF was at the show last night.
Oh, yeah.
And we were standing outside talking for a while. He's like, "Hey man, remember when you played the showcase with AFI?" And I was like, "Yes, I do.
Of course I do.
It was my birthday."
Right.
And I remember that show vividly. He was like, "This is my first time seeing you. I got drugged to that show by Sean Carlson, who does FYF."
Yes.
And he was like, "Sean convinced me that if I drove him to the show, he would get me into the show. He knew someone that would get us in."
Right.
And sure enough, we drive out to that show, and Sean has no ticket.
No ticket.
And he looks at me and he's like, "Sorry, dude, I don't know what to tell you."
Right.
And he's like, "That fucking guy, man."
In typical Sean Carlson fashion.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm sorry.
And he's just like, "That fucking guy."
Yeah.
So he's like, "But I got in to see you guys, man, and that was one of the first times I ever saw you play, and I'll never forget it."
Right.
And I mean, I love Sean to death. I love Phil. But talking to people that far down the line later who you don't know from that capacity, because I mean, I met Sean at a show when he was just a kid,
right?
And I'm pretty sure he was drunk,
of course.
And but Phil, I never really met until years later, and having somebody come up and talk to you about it outside of how they know you, like he knows me as a guy that works for Golden Voice,
right?
Having him tell me that was just kind of like, rad, dude. You know,
right.
It's like when you were that young, there's just something there about it,
right?
And AFI, you know, they were a punk band from the Bay Area,
of course,
time, and not really something that a hardcore band would play with. But you
guys, like you said, you guys always stretch yourself in ways that I saw other bands just not interested in doing, because they didn't have, like, you guys seem to have an agenda of ultimately challenging yourselves to play to that broader audience.
Yeah, it didn't really make it more interesting because we just loved being in the band and we loved playing the shows. But if we were going to get up there and be a straight edge band and we're going to spread a message about leading a cleaner lifestyle, it was something to us that had to be spoken to a broader audience.
Right. The funny thing about all that too, all during that time,
is that I'm sitting here drinking beer right now.
Well, no, that's funny.
This was years ago.
But no judgments. No judgments, but there were judgments for you guys at that time, because it was like, I just remember, because I never put bands in the context of like the scene, in the sense of like, obviously I knew they're from a hardcore scene and that's cool, but like the politics of it, where it's like, okay, the word sellout in regards to like, oh, like Strife is playing all these fucking like mainstream shows, whatever, like Incubus and all these other things that you were doing outside of the proverbial scene. That's when people started to, at least when I noticed, where it's like, oh, Strife are a bunch of sellouts, and you know they're doing all these things that
fucking A.
Right, exactly. And so like was it one of those things you guys just obviously, I mean, it didn't affect you, you guys just kind of took it in stride, or you chose to ignore it?
I would say that we had to kind of like not really prove ourselves more than others, but look, one of the reasons that we started to veer from playing atypical hardcore shows at that time and trying to mix bills up and trying to get involved with other bands was because not only we wanted to spread the message, but there was also a change in the hardcore scene that started to lean more towards violence as an acceptable form of expression, which is not something that we were into. We come from a time of positivity and unity, and not like, hey, let's kick the shit out of that meddler over there because he's got long hair and a Slayer shirt on.
Exactly.
Not that would happen today. We definitely moved past that. Slayer is very accepted.
Yes.
But it was something that we didn't really want to associate our band with. We wanted to associate our band with being a positive influence on hardcore. We wanted to spread a very positive message and not a message of militance or hate. And I think the thing that didn't steer people's attention from us but made them judge us a lot harder was, it was like, well, Earth Crisis are vegan and they're straight edge. Well, what are you? You're a straight edge band. What else are you political? You know, like...
That's true.
So it just seemed like at that time you had to always just bring something more to the table.
You didn't
a band.
That's true. You didn't have these philosophical layers that people could peel away and be like, oh yeah, we can put them in these 3 different boxes.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like, I love Earth Crisis. I always have, and I always will. I think they're great people. Carl rolled out to our show in Syracuse last weekend. It was rad to see him. A lot of kids from that scene still stay in touch, like DJ and Guav, and a lot of good friends were made through times like that. But we never really like saw eye to eye on a lot of things, like where we were coming from. Like, straight edge never had to be a militant thing. It was funny, Rick was telling a story as we were driving to our next show in Albany, where he was like, you know, I just remember having this conversation with Carl years ago where we were just taking a walk down the street, and Carl's like, why don't you hate everybody like that doesn't do this? And Rick just was like, why do you? You know, and they've always had a very open relationship conversationally where they could talk things like this out. No one's mind is ever going to change between the two of them. And, you know, Rick is one of the most insightful deepest and thoughtful people I've ever known in my life, to where, you know, he's, you know, just he's just an all-around great dude, and I believe Carl's the same too, but there are just people that are just absolutely stuck in how they think and how they feel, and it's not really a badge that they wear anymore. Right. It just is something that's inundated in them. Sure. To where it's like so natural now. Right. To move forward. Like I mean, even later on down the road, it was like, even when we were mixing up bills and playing with different bands and stuff like that, it was like Earth Crisis was going on tour with metal bands.
Of course, yeah. You guys were definitely both doing like you had similar focal points in what you were trying to do with your. I mean, because at this point, both of the bands were your guys' careers, and it's like you were attempting to do things differently.
That's where it got bad, man.
Right.
As soon as the band started to become a career, it's just when it got really bad.
Right. That's what obviously became. And it became very immediately apparent to at least just like, you know, the outside world, where it's like when you guys distinctively became like unhappy. Like you could just tell when the band was just not at its finest.
You know what makes things absolutely the worst for bands?
Huh?
Managers.
Yeah.
No offense, managers.
No offense.
I have friends that manage bands and stuff, but
you're the worst. You're ruining your bands. Yeah.
I think nowadays there's managers that are doing great things, like Biggie and Good Fight are absolutely wonderful managers.
Yeah.
Back in those days, typical manager of a hardcore band didn't exist.
No.
If you got a manager, you got a fucking manager.
Right.
Who also possibly managed Dancehall Crashers or Hepcat or No Means No.
Right.
And they didn't understand your band.
No.
And all they wanted to do was work your band.
Get the money
completely.
Right, yeah.
They wanted you on the road no less than 10 days out of every given month.
Right.
And when you're just making absolutely nothing doing it and taking off, 2-3 weeks from whatever job is going to let you do that.
Right.
It was a gigantic pain in the ass.
Right.
And
do you remember the distinct tour that was just basically like...
Yeah, we were playing a few shows with, I want to say it was AFI and Good Riddance.
Okay.
And we did a show at the Huntridge in Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
And as soon as that show was done, so was I. And so was Sid. And
it was just this like unspoken understanding that just kind of laid over.
I just feel that we kind of, as a band, and I think we all, we talked about it later on, and we all kind of like felt the same way, where we just lost the focus of what we were doing. It wasn't fun anymore.
Right.
It wasn't the same reason of why we started the band.
Right.
And we parted ways for a while.
Yeah.
And it was probably the best thing that ever happened to us.
Oh, of course.
I mean, fuck, listen to the Anger Means record.
Right.
That was the best thing that... No, I'm just kidding. I actually love that record, by the way.
You're like, I'll stand by it.
I will absolutely stand by it.
That's good.
It was something that was born out of what we didn't expect to come out of us at the time. It was when we started to get back together and reassociate ourselves with each other after not being in a band for a while.
Right.
Once again, Sid and Andrew started playing together again.
Right.
And they put together a project called Anger Means.
Right.
And they tried out a few different singers, where it ended up being that Rick was the guy that was going to sing for that band.
Right.
And there was kind of a revolving door of guitar players and bass players, where Todd was playing guitar for a little while.
Right.
Franklin from Shelter was playing bass for a little while. Mm-hmm. Then I was playing bass for a little while.
Right.
And our friend Tom Bale, who no one really knows, was playing guitar for a little while.
Right.
And then, unfortunately, there was an accident that happened to one of our very good friends, and a friend of ours that was on the road with us for a great number of years, our friend Jesse, where he was struck and killed by a drunk driver. Mm-hmm. And it was probably one of the hardest things we've ever had to go through. It was really our only first experience with losing one of our friends, and our best friend at that. And this guy was with us in Europe. He was everywhere. He was everywhere we went. And, when that happened, it hit us really hard. And sure enough, we wanted to do something to help out the family with funeral costs.
Sure.
So we put together a couple shows. One was at the Whiskey, and then one was at the now defunct Key Club.
Right.
In Hollywood, and they were with Downset, and we decided that we were going to do the shows with Strife. A lot of kids took offense to this.
Right.
Because we had played some shows as Anger Means, and Anger Means was, a band that may or may not have been something that we were going to do, but to be perfectly honest with you, I don't fucking care.
Right.
It was something where we got up on stage and we decided to do whatever the fuck we were going to do and do what was best for the memory of our friend.
Of course, there's a reason behind it.
Yeah, and it was, again, one of the most right feelings I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
In the band itself, it was something that felt just pure.
Right.
So we took the songs that we had written as Anger Means and kept writing more and more songs.
Right.
And it's like, what the funny thing is about that record? It's like, it is so incredibly, awfully recorded. It is the worst recording.
Yeah.
Ever.
It's
pretty fucking bad.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible.
And there's songs on there that could be awesome fast songs. There's great songs with great breakdowns. It's
right.
The record itself isn't poorly written. There's some questionable stuff. Yeah.
There, of course.
There
right.
most certainly is some questionable things.
You guys it was a very weird time for the band, so it's understandable how random things may have come out that may not have typically popped its head in.
Yeah, we were kind of writing without any limits at that point.
Right.
So we just decided to start kind of like putting into the record whatever we wanted to feel like. And we went in to record it. It came out like dog shit.
Right.
And we had begun a tour actually in support of that record. And we ended up in Chicago. And we went to Victory and we asked Tony, we're like, hey, so what do you think about remixing this album? Mm-hmm. It was like, what? It sounds fine. I'm putting it out. And we're like, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
It's not going to go over well.
Right.
Like, we tried, man. We tried so fucking hard to get that thing redone, and there was
not
nothing.
Interested. Not interested.
Not one bit.
Yeah.
So, sure enough, that thing came out, and it was received terribly.
Yeah.
It got some good reviews, like, here and there, and there are kids that still want to hear songs off that record,
right.
And we still occasionally play, like, one or two of them in a set.
Yeah.
And I like them, and they sound a lot better live than they do on record, I can tell you that much. But
right.
Given the right chance, that record could have been a lot better. But, we kind of let it slide, and we sat back on it for a little while, and we just continued playing a lot of the stuff off of One Truth and Ends Defiance.
Right.
And kept touring off of that for a little while after we got back together, and then had a feeling that we were just kind of going out and going through the motions of every reunion band that's out there, like, oh, you want to get together and play the songs that the kids want to hear, and you're really not giving them anything new, and you're going to Europe. Why?
Right.
Why are you going to Europe?
Here's the third summer in a row we're doing festivals.
You go to Europe when you have something new to support, and you go to Japan when you have something new out there, and you give the kids something new to listen to.
Right.
But most importantly, we wanted to get out there and show these kids that it didn't stop with One Truth and Ends Defiance.
Right, exactly.
We wanted to show them that we can actually, like, produce something more than that. And
of course.
We, to stay, like, interested and involved in it, really just wanted to put out a new record. So Andrew started writing a shitload of songs. And, I mean, even when we weren't as active as a band, even when we got to be touring as a band again, Andrew is at most shows that go on in our area. I go to, whatever shows I can when I can.
Right.
Aside from, the 175 I do here a year.
Right.
But it's something that he is still very much immersed and active and involved in the hardcore scene, and he has just been writing, and he's like, oh well, I've got 20
these songs. Yeah.
Let me. He sends them over to us, and we start like checking them out and everything. And he started piecing a bunch of them together with Nick Jett, who produced our record.
Right.
And Witness the Rebirth was
the product of it.
Yeah.
the record that you guys put out, Witness Rebirth, is honest. I mean, like, no matter what you say about anything that's attached to it, is that it's honest and people see why you guys did it. And like you were alluding to earlier, any negative feelings that people may have had towards Strife in regards to whatever the motivations were, not a straight edge band, doesn't, like, whatever all that is tied into it, you guys have outlived that criticism. I mean, I'm sure it still comes in, but it's much quieter than it has been.
Well, the thing that worked for and against us is there was an underlying criticism when we stopped being a straight edge band.
Right.
And there was a lot of blowback when we put out Anger Means, and it was just kind of like, oh, you're not a straight edge band anymore, you put this new metal fucking record out.
Right.
And then when we, sat down and actually started focusing on Witness a Rebirth and going in the studio, like, we'd played enough shows in the interim, enough time had passed that we pretty much felt that whatever backlash we'd experienced for not being the band that we quote-unquote were anymore had passed.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we're never going to be the band that we were, and I'm hoping that most bands out there are never going to be the band that they were.
Right.
I'm not looking at, a band like Madball 20 years later saying, like, man, why aren't you fucking Madball anymore? It's
right.
Like, you are Madball.
Yeah.
And you have evolved over how many years you've been a band. And, the hopes are that you will continue to put out albums, you will continue to tour, and people will continue to be interested in what you do.
Of course.
With Strife, it was something where we wanted to just put this record out only really to give the kids something new to listen to.
Right.
It is a real record for us in the term that it is the best of In This Defiance, it is the best of One Truth, but it is the record that we wanted to put out again. Where every record that we've done is something that it's been the record that we wanted to write and put out.
Right.
And Anger Means falls in that category as well. But Witness a Rebirth was something that carried a pretty heavy message that was directed directly at the hardcore scene.
Right.
And it wasn't so much like a rebirth of Strife, which is, a slight misconception of the title.
Right.
It's a rebirth actually of the hardcore scene.
Sure.
Because we've gone through quite a few evolutions.
Right. You've seen it evolve over the years.
And the way that it is right now, with bands that are at least keeping the spirit of hardcore alive from bands that came before them, bands like Terror, Backtrack, Down to Nothing,
right.
Alpha Omega, that can at least continue playing real hardcore music to real hardcore kids and spreading a message of what true hardcore is all about, is what the rebirth is.
Right.
It's kind of like saying, from bands like Instead, Gorilla Biscuits, and everyone that came before us, that was a nice path that was laid, but there was also a generation of Hatebreed, Snapcase, Earth Crisis, and Strife that came after that.
Right.
And now we're kind of into like a third wave, if you will, of hardcore
course.
That is a lot of more up-and-coming bands that really do have the responsibility of taking hardcore into the next generation.
Yeah.
And what's awesome about it is new bands now, I think, are born more frequently than they were back when we were doing bands.
For sure.
It's like you would have to sit back and wait for bands like Warzone to come through your town and play a show, where now hardcore is, like we were talking about earlier, just way more readily accessible.
Right.
And you can check out bands from everywhere.
Right.
I mean, the best advice that we've ever given anybody that has the desire to, like, let me rephrase that. I would say my favorite question in an interview is, what advice would you give to somebody that wants to start a band?
Right.
Start a band.
Yeah. It's pretty simple.
It's, well, how do you get out there and play shows?
Yeah.
You just play shows.
Right.
I mean, you grow your band,
right.
especially to make it the band that you want it to be, hopefully at a grassroots level.
Right.
And it's funny, I had one of my stagehands was working the show yesterday, And he's not a guy that works here very often. I've seen him around from time to time, and I had literally just flown in from doing shows on the East Coast the night before, and he's got a jacket on that says American Straight Edge across the back of it, and he's loading in one of our bands that's playing that night, and I'm standing outside, and he comes up to me and he's like, "Hey man, are you guys playing with Judge this weekend?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "That's awesome." I was like, "I don't know, you know, it's gonna be a lot of fun." I was like, we did a Black and Blue Bowl with them a few months ago, and it was something that I never thought I would see ever
again.
Andrew is the only one in our band, I think, that's seen Judge. I don't think Rick's seen Judge, but anyway, I was like, yeah, it's gonna be a fucking blast. I'm totally looking forward to it. And he was like, yeah, that's cool. And he starts to get into talking about how he's from San Diego and he does shows down in San Diego, and he was like, you know, down in San Diego, it was like, we don't really mess around with a lot of clubs or anything like that. We just play in sewers. And I was like, can I come play in the sewer?
Yeah.
I was like, what do you guys do? Do you bring in generators, you know,
right.
and some lights, maybe?
Right.
He was like, yeah, you know, it's totally, that's all we do. We just do that. And I was like, I fucking want to do that.
Right.
Please, can I just go down there and play like
just
a
play
real
sewer.
goddamn show?
Right.
In your sewer.
Right. You're like, this is perfect. This is where I want to be
like,
right at this point.
Yeah, we can do that. And, you know, it's just like, to me, people like that are looking to pop up hardcore shows wherever they can in sewers.
Yeah, exactly.
Is,
right.
I mean,
that's
definitely not the most glamorous thing, and I'm sure it's not what most people think about when they start a band, but it's definitely something I want to do these days.
Yeah, exactly. It's like having those fun experiences. Well, Chad, I appreciate you letting me bend your ear for longer than I originally anticipated, but you had great stories, so kept it going.
Are we done?
We're done.
Pretty fun, right? His childhood story is crazy, right? I felt like I could have talked for another hour and a half about that. I digress. Visit propertyofzach.com. Visit 100wordspodcast.com. The editor, as always, is the beautiful Tom Richfield for this episode. Happy holidays, everybody. There will be a very, very special episode for the next one, the infamous year-end list, where we're talking to some previous guests of the show. We're having a little roundtable talking about our favorite records, movie, TV, that sort of stuff. So be prepared. It will be quite a long episode because I think the previous ones have lasted, I don't know, hour and a half, close to 2 hours. So bear with us, but you'll become educated about, our favorite music. So thank you for joining us. And until next week, be safe, everybody.